Okay, now we get to our gospel passage, which of course is the heart of the Epiphany because it's the scene that we all know and love very well. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. Since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word that I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them, until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. Oh man, okay, so good. So what's the deal? I love the Epiphany, so let's just get that out of the way. You could tell from the first session that this is just a really exciting thing. I love the idea of these guys coming from the east. Like somehow they just know that there's going to arise a king, for them, a king from the west. And so when they're looking at the stars, they understand like, okay, that's the thing that we got to see. So some people aren't there's debate about what this star is that they see. Some people, including many church fathers, so very early Christians, understand this star to be a supernatural thing. That it's not just like looking at the stars as we see them today, but that there's a supernatural star that literally guides them and kind of reveals itself to them, which may very well be the case. There are other people that think it's truly something in the sky. And that's up for debate. Either way, these guys, they decide something great is happening, and they drop everything. They drop everything, and they travel literally hundreds of miles. You can ask Google how far they traveled, and you're going to get a mixture of answers, but it's like a minimum of 500 miles that they traveled, which for us in the days of having cars and planes and trains and all these things, like the 500 miles maybe isn't that big a deal. It's like a full day of driving, but it's not that big a deal. But for them, like they're taking camels, like or walking. So 500 miles is a lot. And then there's other estimations that are like over 1,000 miles of travel that they took. And so anyway, I love that idea and what that looked like. And they did it all for just a moment with this king who's a child. It's amazing. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Of course, we know this, in Judea, Bethlehem of Judea. So that's like a helpful thing to know that. Bethlehem is not far from Jerusalem. We mentioned in the last session that Jerusalem is the capital of Judah, capital of Israel, but the capital of Judah, and Bethlehem is in Judah as well. I don't know the distance between the two, but they're close enough that they're within the same tribal territory. So Jesus is born there in the days of King Herod. So, okay, we know that at the time of Jesus, Israel was occupied by the Roman Empire, and so they would set up kings, and Herod was one of these kings who was like half Jewish, but then half Edomite. So he was his ancestry was from Edom, which is going to come into play in a minute. So anyway, so he's half, but he's very corrupt. He's very he's like very paranoid. In fact, he's paranoid frequently that people are going to try to take his throne. He even kills his wife and some of his children because of that. So it's this pretty significant thing that this guy is the king. And of course, we know that Joseph later on is warned, and these magi are even warned in a dream, but Joseph later on is warned, like, you got to get out of town because Herod is trying to kill all the kids that are born in Bethlehem 2 years old and younger. In fact, it happens right after this passage that we don't read during our Sunday Mass. So anyway, so that's a big deal. So these magi from the east, they arrive in Jerusalem, and they're like, "Where's the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." To do him homage is another way that it could be translated is to worship him. We've come to worship him. So significant thing here about this star. So we saw his star. A lot of Bible scholars now will talk about how this is a fulfillment of something that comes in the book of Numbers. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, the fourth book of the Bible, where this guy Balaam, or Balaam, however you want to pronounce it, he's hired by someone to prophesy falsely. We had this reading a few weeks ago in Mass. He's He's hired to prophesy poorly against, to curse basically the people of Israel, and the Lord takes over and actually delivers a blessing instead. So all part of Balaam's blessing reveals this star. So in chapter 24 of the book of Numbers, verses 15 through 18, it talks about how a star is going to come from Jacob. So a star is going to come. So this star. And the end of this prophecy in verse 18 talks about how Edom will be dispossessed. So for Herod, an Edomite, he, of course, what happens when he hears about this star, whether he, and this is the thing, we don't know for sure whether he knows about this or not, but if he knows about this, when he hears about this star that has risen, that is coming from Jacob, it's led people to Israel, led people to the heart of Israel, then this star is going to lead to the dispossession of Edom. Well, Herod, who is an Edomite, it says, when Herod heard of this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Of course, this makes sense. If he's paranoid, if he's a terrorizer, if he's corrupt and wicked, it makes sense that all of Jerusalem would be troubled with him, not because they're troubled about the king, but because they're troubled about the king and the problem that this current king is going to bring upon them. So that's a significant thing. Okay, so then he's like, okay, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know where this king is supposed to be. So I'm going to get together the religious leaders, the people who are supposed to know the answer. Of course, they give the answer. And so okay, in Bethlehem of Judea, because, and then he quotes Micah 5, which we had a couple of Sundays ago. I think it's the fourth Sunday of Advent, where Micah 5 says, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. So, okay, in Bethlehem. So you got to go to Bethlehem. So then Herod calls them secretly because he's developing his own plans. He calls them secretly. And he's like, okay, go find out and then come back. And they're like, okay, whatever. We're going and we're going to look diligently. I think that's an important thing, to search diligently. There's so many different ways we can spiritually or morally apply this. And it's like, are we searching diligently for Jesus? Are we searching diligently for this king that we profess to be king, but maybe we don't always have encounters with him? Are we diligently searching for him? I think that's just a thing that comes from this corrupt person, but nonetheless, we can take it to heart as a real thing. Okay, when you found him, bring me word that I too may go and worship him. It says, do him homage, but I too may go and worship. So he's pretending like he's interested in worshiping this king. So after their audience, they set out, behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over. So this is why some church fathers think that this is a supernatural thing, that the star moves and it stops right over the place, suggesting that it's not up in the sky, but it's actually something that's lower that is guiding them. Again, it's not doctrine by any means, and you're free to believe that it's up in the sky, and there are people who have done that kind of work, and that's great. But perhaps it is a supernatural thing. Who knows? So anyway, so what happens? They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. So a couple of things to point out here. So they entered the house and they saw the child. It doesn't say they saw the infant. And again, I don't know Greek, but my understanding is that the word for infant is different from the word for child, which suggests that all of this is taking place not immediately after the birth of Jesus, like what we typically see in our nativity sets, where we have Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus still in the manger and the shepherds there, but then also the Magi approaching at the same time. The Bible seems to suggest that this took place a chunk of time afterward, like perhaps a few months. Perhaps even within 2 years, actually. Because what happens, Herod, he has all of the boys who are born 2 years old and younger killed. There's a pretty significant difference between an infant and a 2-year-old. And so perhaps as he is seeking the timing of everything from the Magi kind of lay it out, and they're saying well, it might be as much as 2 years ago. So anyway, so again, the Bible doesn't tell us the exact timing of things, but it is possible, and I would say it's actually likely that this took place a chunk of time after the birth of Jesus. They go into the house. They don't go to the stable or the manger that is spoken about earlier in the Gospels. Okay, so anyway, whatever. However that works out, they were overjoyed. They see the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. So that word proskuneo, the way that Matthew uses that word is typically exclusively used in terms of worship of God. And here these Magi see this child and they worship him as God. They do him homage. Then they open their treasures and offer him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return, they depart for their country another way. So these dreams, of course, in Matthew's gospel are very significant, very helpful. Now, the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh. What's the deal here? So, one, point out, the gospel does not tell us how many magi there were. We typically associate 3 of them because there are 3 gifts, and so you presume that each gift was presented by his own distinct magi. But again, there could have been some traditions say there were even as many as 12 magi that traveled together. We don't know for sure, but it seems like 3 is the kind of typical number. But gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So there's a bunch of different ways that people have interpreted these gifts throughout history. Of course, the gold and the frankincense are the easy connection with our first reading from Isaiah. But what do they point to? So gold points to the royalty of Jesus. The frankincense points to the divinity of Jesus because you use incense during worship. And the myrrh is a burial ointment or a burial oil that is pointing to the humanity of Jesus, his passion and his death. So those 3 things, that's significant. Other ways that we could look at this actually is that myrrh is included among the oils that were mixed together in the book of Exodus chapter 30. There were a bunch of oils that were mixed together when it was time to consecrate the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the temporary house of God in the desert. So they mixed myrrh among the oils, and as well as to anoint Levitical priests who were ordained and consecrated for the sake of offering worship in those places. So that myrrh, it would also point to that reality of Jesus, of him being, of course, being the very one who lives within the tabernacle, but also the one who is the eternal high priest. So that's kind of a neat connection. The frankincense, of course, like I mentioned, is it pointing to our worship, or is pointing to worship of God, divinity, that kind of thing. Other interpretations talk about how it relates to us, because after all, these gifts are offered to Jesus, and so the gold is like an offering of the wisdom of Christ that he has given to us by way of our baptism, by way of our revelation that we've received of him. St. Paul's going to talk about this in our second reading, how the mysteries have been made known to him, and so he's been made wise in Christ. And so the gold is like this thing that makes us shine before him, that we become wise in him. The frankincense is a sign of our prayer and our adoration that we offer to him. And then the myrrh is a sign of our daily sacrifices, our daily acts of self-denial. Just like if myrrh is a burial ointment, that points to death. So too for us, we die daily, or we are to take up our cross daily and die to ourselves and offer him acts of self-denial and worship. So anyway, so like all those things are they're super cool. One more connection from an author that I read from. He talks about how there's one instance in the Old Testament when frankincense and myrrh are connected to each other, and they are connected in the Song of Songs for nuptial perfumes. They're put together, mixed together for nuptial perfumes, as though these magi are revealing that Jesus has come as the king, of course, and that's the gold, but also as the bridegroom who has come to wed himself to his bride, the church. And of course, we know this because he establishes a covenant, the sacred family bond, where the bridegroom marries his bride, and they give themselves totally to each other. Man, there's so many really neat connections here, and there's not like one that's better than the other, or one that's absolutely, because it leaves it open for interpretation, I suppose. But these beautiful interpretations just reveal like more and more of this great mystery of Jesus, who has come as our King, who has come as our bridegroom, and he weds himself to us, and we in turn can offer him our acts of self-denial. We in turn can offer him our prayer and our adoration. We in turn can even offer him the wisdom that he has given to us, so that we can shine brightly before him and give glory to our Heavenly Father. Ooh, gosh, that's so good, so good. Okay, we got one last little reading from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, so I'll look forward to sharing that with you then. Peace.